So I think I've got like two sort of main groups of bass. A lot of these are sort of mid-bass sounds, and I kind of ended up with tons of layers from previous drops, basically. So there's sort of like lots of different bits and bobs here. But basically the idea centres around this bass sound, which is, there's an old DJ Hazard tune called Busted. DJ Hazard's like a drum bass producer, sort of with real cult status, made some amazing tunes over the years. This, I kind of really wanted to make a sound very similar to this old tune that he did. And I was playing around with Massive and sort of trying to get there. So just I was sort of trying to figure out what he did. I think I ended up yeah, so basically I think the sort of sonic signature of this sound is that it has a very subtle sort of pitch bend in it, that I spent quite a long time trying to recreate. And it's also got some notch filtering and bandpass movement on it, which kind of creates the sound as well. So if you take those off, it's very straight. Then you put these on, it's got a kind of up and down sort of movement to it. So I've basically used these performance LFOs to do the pitch bend, which is just +12, and also these performance LFOs to do the filter movement. And then I've got this one doing a volume curve, just so that it's just a sort of solo sound rather than it sustaining. Reason for that, I think, is that the sort of the way the pitch bend works, you don't want to hear like the end of it, sort of thing. Like if I make this louder, yeah, actually I need to take the filter off as well, so it'd be like this. But basically you just don't want to hear the end of the pitch bend, so something like that. That's a bit longer actually, so it goes like this. Once I'd got this, once I had this sound going, I sort of put it through a bit of a change. So it's going through this, I don't know why I used this waves compressor, I think just to get a bit more level. Then a touch of saturation, again, probably just to get a bit more level and attitude. It's got a bit of this Dim D plugin, which is like an emulation of an old Roland, famous old Roland chorus, which is very subtle on it. It's not doing an awful lot. I've then used this Moog EQ, which is something I use quite a lot. It's basically really good for adding air and like high frequencies to sounds. So I've done an incredibly harsh setting here, because I think the original sound's quite low pass, so I sort of lost a lot of treble and then I was adding a lot back on, which is probably not the best way to make a sound, but I just sort of liked where I got to with it, so I kept that. It's got this FabFilter Pro R reverb on it as well. And H delay, which is pretty much my favourite sort of tape delay style plugin, just quarter notes. So. Then that's going into a compressor, which is sidechaining from the kick. And then I've got a utility plugin on the out. I think I quite often do this because I don't like to automate the levels in Ableton on the mixer, because then you can't change the overall level. So as in, like, if this was being modulated, that would have to remain fixed. So I quite like to do any volume automation. I like to do it on separate plugins, basically, just to kind of keep things tidier. What I think is interesting about this sound is I basically changed the sort of the side chaining and the reverb on it as the track goes on. So on the second 16, so it starts off like this. I'll just play you a couple of bars. And then the second 16, it repeats. Sounds kind of weird and out of time without anything else there, but basically it repeats, but with either a volume automation or a sidechain on it. I just need to remember how I actually did that. Basically just sounds a lot drier on the second repeat, and it kind of allows you to, you know, I normally wouldn't use such a sort of distinctive lead sound like that 2 sections in a row, but it sort of allows you to kind of repeat it without it sounding boring. Yeah, so the automation I did on this bass is up here in the mid-bass master channel. I've grouped all the mid-bass together. What I've done is use the draw tool to turn on and off this LFO tool, just doing this pattern. So another example of just using the LFO tool to automate volume, basically. And it just allows me to kind of reuse the previous lead section in the second 16, but have it like tighter and basically just sort of like make sort of fades on the reverb to give it a different feel. Yeah, it's actually going massively out of time at the moment. I find that sometimes this happens in Ableton. It's a bit that you can have sort of plugins like LFO tool drifting out of time. So if that happens, I tend to render those sections, basically. Not sure what's happening now. And then the rest of there's kind of a few like other bass layers that are less important that I've sort of grouped all together, I think, which are all in here. Just try and play them now. I quite like this element. I'm trying to find out where it is. Oh yeah, so is it here? There's one element I've sort of automated the LFO of a sound, and I've kind of had it just of one of the sort of mid-range bass sounds, and I've got it just like popping in here and there to do those kind of trills, like these bits. Yeah, this one here. So that channel's turning on and off like this, and you're just getting this little snatch of bass with an automated LFO. So yeah, don't know. There's lots of little bass layers basically here. Some of them are renders, like this one here, and some of them are still active, but they're kind of not really the main layers that you hear. It just adds a little bit of interest, I guess. Let's go through all the bits. Right. So these are the lower bass layers that are the most obvious. So they're so there's a sub layer, and I'll just go into that quickly actually, just to show you that. Subs actually weirdly it's a triangle wave, but I normally on this track I've basically used a triangle wave and then filtered it down just to give myself slightly more harmonics. So most of the time I'll just use a sine wave for the sub bass, but sometimes I'll use triangles or squares and then filter them down with a low pass afterwards, which just means that you just get slightly different harmonics. And if I want the sub to sound slightly warmer, those are the type of things I'd sort of go towards doing. And then I'd also sometimes I put saturation on it. This has got a saturator on it, but it's turned off. So yeah, a combination of, sort of saturation and low passing is a good way to add harmonics to sub bass, which can kind of make it sound a bit warmer. And then above that, I've got this, which is quite a sort of wide, mid-rangey sound. For this, I've used a combination of saw waves and then one of the digital oscillators in Serum. Basically done this to add a bit more bite to the some of the wavetable oscillators are really good for doing that kind of thing. So just adding a bit more of a sort of crunchy top end to the than you would get from a regular saw wave. And then you can sort of, this particular sound you can sort of alter the tone of by moving the wavetable position, which is something sometimes I'd automate that as well. I think I've used it, put it on sync as well, but I don't think that's actually doing anything. But that's also something I quite like to do, to add harmonics to sounds. If I want to have like a very obvious strange harmonic, I might add that using the sync setting, which is one of the sort of settings in this menu in the oscillator and Serum. And then I've also got that on just the LFOs, doing it's just modulating a low pass on that on eighth notes. And I've used the compressor on a multiband setting and a slight EQ curve within Serum. The compressor on multiband sounds to me quite similar to OTT, which is the plugin we talked about earlier, which is just a kind of a multiband that has quite a sort of extreme setting that a lot of people in dance music would use for these type of sounds. To sort of add presence, like exaggerate reverb tails, that type of thing. So yeah. So those are the bass layers.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the bass sounds there. Most of them have been made in FM8, and it's a pretty basic technique, but I really like the sort of human character that they have. They're sort of like almost talking, but not in a modern talking kind of way. So we have the very first instance of it playing this sound, and it's basically just FM8, a couple of operators. It's basically just a sine wave being frequency modulated, but the funny thing about it is that you make the sound by looping one of the main modulators. So let me see if I can show you. So it's this waveform looping, modulating the main waveform, and the character of the track has been made by having a bunch of these FM8 instances with slightly different loop ranges and slightly different processing on the sounds so that you get a little bit of life in there. So let's see. The if I would recreate something similar like this, would just go straight here. Ja, det heb je al aan. Oops. So that will work. I still don't know how to manually switch on or off the loop function within the envelope of FM8. I think we figured it out at some point, but just generally load a looping pattern. I think it had something to do with the release being... No, it doesn't work like that. Okay, so I'm gonna pick any waveform. Okay. So this is already quite a similar kind of sound, but then just pick try different waveforms for the modulation, and change the waveform up. Not so cool right now. Okay, so say this would be your bass sound, your basic bass sound, and then what I would always do here is fuck it up a little. We love the isotope plugins for that. There's also a whole bunch of other things that you can use, but I really like using Trash because it's very hands-on, and it's pretty basic. You split the sound into 3 bands, and then you put different distortions on these 3 bands. I would generally just try different kinds of distortion for the different bands, but I think I already sort of know which ones I would want to use here. Wouldn't want to fuck it up too much. And then what we've done for this particular sound in this track is have a little bit of short reverb before the distortion, which you can then automate in time. Not so very cool right now by itself. And then I think there was an EQ on every instance of it, just to make sure that there was no muddy, super low frequencies going on. And then you just fiddle around with it. try different ones, different sounds, and of course there are a lot of other sounds to complement all of this. Let's see if I can solo all of the bass sounds. So yeah, it's a combination of those FM8 sounds and some audio slices, like for example this one, where we've just imported a sound that we've made before and just taken it out of its context and used a little piece of it in this track. I can look up where the sound is originally from, Euro Contact. So we have this extensive library of monthly organized sounds that we've exported to use for later projects, such as this one. So if I look for this specific sound, okay, this is the sound. So, and it's been used in this project like this. Oh, sorry. Just that little bit of it. On top of that, we layered another sliced sound. Not this one, I guess. Oh, yes. Here it is. Actually, oh, it's not layered on top of that. It's the only thing we're not so crazy about in Cubase is that you don't see the muted parts show up muted in your event. It looks like it's actually there. It's this sound. Yeah. So that's a little scream layered on top of the bass sound. So that's one way to make a very random compilation of sounds sound like a tune.
So as I was saying before, this track started as an experiment with bass sound design. It was something that I felt I was lacking in with my previous work, and I really wanted to learn more about it. So I started watching a bunch of tutorials on YouTube, and I learned this one technique from this producer Slynk, S-L-Y-N-K. And shout out to him. He really inspired me on this one. It's basically, the idea behind it is you're using operator, and then you're setting a custom kind of effect chain. This is all sort of interchangeable, but the idea is to play around with distortions and different character like things that plugins that give the bass character, and between that and automating filters, I was using a bandpass filter on both of these, and I did some automation, as you can see on here and on here. So after that, I put some more distortion on it, some small room reverb, chorusing, more distortion. I'm surprised I didn't actually use any OTT on this, which is I think he was suggesting in the video, but it's really just up to you, like how you want to do this. The goal is to make a chain that is constantly changing and sort of like warping the sound. Here, I'll just play it for you so you can hear what we're talking about. So yeah, something like that. And then what you do from there is you record the audio. You through resampling, like for instance, I'll just open up an empty channel here, hit record, go to resample, and then just let it play. And I'll mess around with some of the parameters. So yeah, then once you have your recording, you pop that bad boy into a simpler, and then it allows you to kind of play around with that sound. I almost knocked my drinks over. Put it into a simpler, and then I got my keyboard down here. Oh yeah, I got a record on it. So that's just playing a little chunk of the audio. You can move the start point around and so yeah, it allows you to kind of play around with the sound and come up with, you know, maybe you just find one little chunk that you like, and that becomes the bass line of your entire song. So yeah, that ended up being what inspired the Relic. I started off with this kind of bass sound. So let's open up the first version of the track, the first demo session. All right, so here's the first version of the session. Let me minimize everything. So I brought in the bass into here. Get out of here, iLock. So yeah, again, I brought that recorded audio into a simpler, and then added some new chain behind it, giving it extra character. Got the OTT in there, convolution reverb for some more room reverb sound, even more room reverb. Got a limiter so it doesn't crap out on us. Toned down the width because I think there's like a chorusing sound in the original sample that was a little too wide and a little distracting. And then rolled off the lower frequencies so that we can we will have a dedicated sub channel. I'm sure you're familiar with this technique of having the top and bottom layers so that the subs aren't really interfered with all the higher frequencies, and they can just shine through, and you can lower it or raise it depending on, you know, how you want it to be balanced with the top bass layer. So I have that, and yeah, this was the first kind of groove I came up with here. Let's hear it. Well, let me just do the bass. So I have this LFO here that's changing the offset of the start time. As you can see, it jumped to a new section in the sample based on the automation of this offset. Also, we have this envelope follower. So what the envelope follower is doing is it's taking the audio from the sample, and you could set the levels of the gain and everything, but basically depending on the decay time and the sustain, whenever there's no sound, you see there's no, because this is controlling the filter over here, so you can see that it's at 0 right now because there's no audio coming in. But once audio does come in, the audio itself from the sample controls the frequency of the filter. This just kind of gives it a different kind of attack and a different kind of decay, rather than it just being the amplitude. It's doing it with the filter as well. This is what it sounds like without it. Well, let me turn this up. Not a huge difference. Yeah, just it's a subtle little thing. You can get a little more extreme with it.
The bass sound, I started out in Operator, and I just made a kind of like a deep house sort of sound. Yeah, kept it pretty simple. Had a few little things like this just to give it some movement, like LFO, like just with the attack fluctuating, and then like a chorus and a few other things like this. So once I played the main riff, which is something like this, so I processed that into audio, and then that's when I started to sort of like manipulate things. So this is kind of how it turned out, and I'll show you how I got to that point in a sec. So basically, there's two layers. So you've got the bottom layer, which is the one that I just played you this bit. I started out with, I think there's like might be a high pass on that as well, just to kind of bring it in. And then what I did is then I duplicated that and I did a higher pitch version, which does some interesting harmonic things that kind of just complement the main bass line and just gives it a little bit more of like a different flavor as it comes in. So so this is that on its own. So what I've done is I've pitched it up, but I've also done some like portamento stuff to kind of give it a little bit more of more movement. And I've also just put like a ping pong delay only on the high pitched part of the bass sound. And yeah, and then it sounds like this together. This is just the bass. There's a bit of like room reverb that kind of drops in at the end. But it's not perfect, and there's probably like a few phase things happening, but I think that's what gives it like some of the characteristics of the sound. Yeah, gives it its gnarliness. It's quite dirty. There's like, I think I might have put, I think I ran it through this sampler as well, just to give it a little bit of grit at the end.
From years and years and years of writing hard tech sounds, I've been kind of experimenting with different ways of creating kick basses. It can be really complicated and it can be really quite simple at times. As most things with music production, I think simplicity is often the way. And you can get caught up with, you know, things like phase and everything like that with writing kick bass. So this one particular, I actually, on this track, I started as a drum and bass section, and I used the kick drum from my drum and bass drums as the kick drum to lead the techno section as well, which could be seen as quite controversial, because in writing techno, you know, you kind of want to develop the kick so it has enough like kind of low end to let the track have that energy and to create good phase between your kick and your bass. But for this, I've just used a D&B kick, which are often, you know, quite a lot higher cut, and in fact I've done quite a lot of EQing and you know, effects to kind of make this kick kind of pop a bit, but it's also quite short, which kind of helps with you know, connecting the phase between the kick and the bass for the techno section. So instead of creating a big fat techno kick that's all the way down at 40 hertz, 50 hertz, I kind of used a D&B kick, which is a lot higher in frequency and a lot punchier, really, less sub. So I could put more sub into the bass. And the bass on this one is predominantly just made really simply in Serum, which is my kind of go-to synth. For the last kind of like 5-6 years or so, I've been really getting into my synthesis and learning synthesis. I'm not great at it, but I can certainly make a lot of my own sounds now, which is great. And this is kind of one of those signature sounds. It's kind of taken on a kind of side bass kind of thing. So I just play it on its own. And you know, it's essentially just a pluck bass, just a really simple pluck bass. And you know, I can say it's quite simple to make. I mean, I've just basically, you know, shortened the decay on the envelope 1, and I brought the sustain all the way, like nearly all the way to the top. I just felt that that was what the sound needed. It needed to be quite short and staccato. And then I've just used this LFO1 to do pretty much all of the work. So on here, if I just make it bigger, actually, see a bit better. I've just literally got LFO1 with like a really simple curve on quarter notes there, and I've just assigned that mainly to a basic shape over here. On a saw. I think that's a saw or a square. Like I said, I'm not that great at synthesis. Well, I don't know everything, but I'm learning. But yeah, I just I found this shape worked the best for what I was wanting to do. So if I just bypass these few things, we can kind of see what's going on. So originally it was just kind of just that. Which is kind of like, if I take the sub away as well, it's like kind of not really anything. But then what I did from there is just LFO over to a take the LFO over to the filter, and created some movement just to give it like kind of like the high end kind of click. I gave it some resonance, some drive, some fatness, and then I just added in an FM from the B oscillator, which is actually on its kind of preset sound over here. So that's the standard wave that is there when you open it. And I just FM'd off of that. I just thought that that was kind of like the sound that I'm going for. I also LFO'd the detune on there as well, because that sound is now affecting my main oscillator. So I kind of just wanted a bit of width coming through that FM as well, and then just added a sub behind it on direct out, and that kind of gives me the kind of basics of it. I also added some drive and distortion on the back end using this LFO yet again, and I also used this EQ here. If I take the EQ off, it kind of like clashes a bit with this direct sub out. So I use this EQ here just to kind of like pull this sound away from the sub. So the sub's just kind of doing its own thing, and you've got this clicky plucky sound over the top. And that's the essential basics of the kind of kick bass that I've been going for with my crossover D&B techno tunes. But from there, I kind of wanted to process it a little bit. I never do much processing, but I felt like I needed to add some EQ curve onto here as well. Just really quite simple. I just boosted around 40 a little bit, and pushed it up around 400 hertz, and then gave it a bit of a high shelf as well. And then from there, I needed to tighten up the kick to bass thing. So if I solo in the kick as well at this point, and this is a kind of process that I usually do when creating my kick bass, is I start with like a kind of, you know, a kick or a fundamental bass sound, and then I, you know, like have them both soloed together, so I get a feel on how they're sounding together. And And from there, I use this tool quite a lot. This is one of my go-tos. In fact, I've just upgraded to Nicky Romero's Kickstart 2 because it's got the ability to sidechain on it as well, which is really, really great. But for this one, I've just used it just to shape that kind of sidechain element at the kick to the bass. Just taking away this like kind of start of the bass hit there to give the kick a bit more room to come through. Which is like kind of automatically tidied it up quite a lot. I also use scope as well just to check phase on things as well and stuff like that. So in fact I should probably have put that on the group. I probably do have one on the group somewhere. I don't, but yeah, it's a great tool to kind of check your phase between your kick and your bass, because I mean it is kind of important to make sure that you are getting a good phase between your kick and your bass. So you can actually on this this tool scope, you can like kind of freeze on like kind of a kick, and you can kind of zoom in on it, so you can see if there's good phase there. You know, if you got bad phase, there'll be like a real broken bit here, which kind of, that's the distortion peak, and it's not looking too bad. I think the phase is pretty good there. So that would kind of tell me that I'm kind of in the right ballpark, and also just using my ears as well is really important. But then for the rest of the bass processing, it was really quite simple, and this is a trick that I used to do quite a lot in my old tracks, in my techno stuff, but I kind of like, you learn these kind of techniques that kind of help, like, you know, mold a sound or create a sound, and then you go off on tangents and find other different ways of doing it, and sometimes that can be a bit detrimental, and you end up kind of like just making it harder for yourself. And I was sat in the studio with Akov, brilliant neurofunk producer, big up Akov, and Alex, you know, kind of on a different tune we were doing, I wrote a very similar bass, and he was like, you know, why don't you just chuck some distortion over it? And it didn't really occur to me, but it makes such a difference. So I kind of like made this original bass patch here, but then I chucked amp over it, and it just brings the whole thing to life. You know, it goes from being quite a thin kind of all right kick bass to a really powerful kick bass, and that's the kind of energy that I kind of want to have in my tracks.
So this is Freak, which is my collaboration with TS7, and it's maybe my biggest track in terms of numbers and stuff. So I just thought I'd show you a quick breakdown. I mean, I'll just play you a snippet of the track quickly. It's quite a simple track. Yeah, so it's obviously got this really sort of melodic bass line which is leading. So all these sounds are made in Massive, the old Massive, not the new one. So what have we got on top? So this is the top layer. Yeah, so I guess it's really about just trying to like fill out the whole like frequency spectrum. So obviously that's kind of like the high end, and then got one in the middle here. Obviously that's kind of beefing it out, and then another mid one here. I mean, that sounds a bit rubbish on its own, but it just kind of, I'd say it does make a bit of a difference without. This is with. Gives it a bit of like warmth as well. And then obviously the sub, I always split the sub and the main bass, because I feel like it gives more control. So I'll just make an EQ and cut the low end from the bass, and then I'll have a separate sub here. The sub's it's very like bouncy because I've side chained it through the compressor. And I mean, as I mentioned, I really like the Logic compressors. Some of the settings like give you a lot of power. Yeah, so all together. And then on the switch, I just added one little extra one in to create a sort of new sonic. So in terms of the actual sound, I made this sound in Massive, and yeah, I'd say I was quite known for like the sort of melodic bass, which is still quite hard hitting, which is quite a hard sort of middle ground to find. I mean, I'd say the key to this one is the frequency shifter in Logic. In Massive. It's one of these inserts down here, so you would actually be quite amazed if I turn this off. It just sounds quite flat. It just gives it a really nice tone. And then the parabolic shaper as well. I feel like you can get a lot more out of Serum, but Massive is just historically what I've always used. So, and then just really messing around with like the oscillators and the wave tables. Yeah, so that's the bass in Freak.
If you want, I can show you how I do this. For example, let's say we take a normal 909 kick. We do a basic pattern. Which is the most simple way of having a kick. And afterwards, what I do is I just put a lot of effects on a return track. For example, I start with an overdrive. Next to this, I will put in a convolution reverb, which is a reverb from the Max thing from a live, Max audio effect. It's based on convolutions, and I really like this because it has a really nice character in the different convolutions that you can find in here. Next to this, I make some kind of filter delay. And then I will finalize with a simple filter, which gives me the typical techno rumble. And this rumble is very nice because it's not really a character sound, it's not a bass sound that needs to be on a specific tone or whatever, but it will give you the power of the kick underneath. So what I then do is I bounce this, just like this, then I remove the complete thing, and then I use something which is called Xfer LFO tool. It's a sidechain. You can use it for a lot of things, but I use it for a sidechain effect because for me it's an easier way to put this on instead of, you know, going through the routing of the side chaining with compressors and stuff like this. So as you can see, it will now automatically pump all the time without any problem. And then on top of this, what I then usually do is I start to put some extra saturation or whatever, like the ones you know from sound toys, decapitators or stuff like this. Most of the time I also use, let's say, typical EQs, which are emulations of older EQs, like the ones from UAD. Why? Because you can add some extra character, like the Pultec sounds, and because it can bring up your complete character of the bottom or mid or high sounds. So let me search those. No, it's not this one. It's the legacy one. This is my baseline. So eventually the one that I used in the beginning, which is this, is based on the same principle, but it's like a complete processed one. So let us continue on that one instead of the one that I just created.